Hey there! Today we are cooking with beef stock, cheese, French bread, and a whole lot of onions. On this episode of What Do You Make of This? We're doing French onion soup. French onion soup is one of my all-time favorite comfort foods. This bistro classic takes some relatively humble ingredients, but it elevates them to impossible heights. I do want to make clear though, this is not a speedy weeknight supper. This is slow cooking at its finest. It's perfect for a really cold, lazy day, so put on your comfy clothes and let's get cooking. The first thing I'm going to do for this soup is actually going to be to make some toast. So what I have here is just a regular plain white bread. This is a French loaf that I'm using, but you could also use something like a French baguette. Sourdough works really well. I do recommend though for this recipe, try to use white bread if possible, because it just really helps to keep the flavor as classic as possible, and it is a beautiful canvas for what we're going to be doing with this soup. So I'm using a toaster oven. What I like to do when I make the bread for this recipe is actually to pre-butter it and toast it that way. What happens is as it cooks, the bread will actually absorb all of the butter, and the butter will have a chance to caramelize a little bit, which gives it just an extra layer of flavor. If, however, you have an upright toaster, please don't do that because it's a great way to start a grease fire, which is bad news in the kitchen. An alternate though is to actually do this in your oven at like 325, check it after about 5 minutes, but we're just going to be looking for it to be really light golden brown. I have to butter very carefully with this bread because it is so soft and fluffy, so pardon me while I focus because the last thing I want to do is tear this beautiful bread. You'll see what we're doing with it later. So a little more butter on this guy. So what I'm going to be doing with this is it's actually going to be going on top of the soup near the final cooking stages. You just want to make sure that you have enough bread toasted that it will cover the top of each bowl of soup. So you may need to do a little bit of bread measurement to make sure you've got enough beforehand. But what I'm going to be doing with this is just popping them all into my toaster. And I'm not looking for a really dark toast, just a light golden brown at most. I think I can fit one more in the back there. And I'm just going to put this on, and once it is done toasting, I'm actually just going to set it aside and forget about it. It doesn't come into play again until near the very end of the cooking process. I am going to wipe off the butter from my fingers though, because I do not want to be slippery while I'm slicing. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is be chopping up some garlic. So what I have here are 3 of the biggest cloves of garlic that I could find on my garlic. You can use smaller ones. If you like a lot of garlic, feel free to add more. I like it to just be a little bit of a background flavor in this soup though, because the onions really are the star of the show. So to mince up these garlics, I'm going to start by just slicing off the woody ends. Oh, I'm getting lucky today. The garlic is just peeling. That never happens. Usually you have to whack it first. Okay. That one, yeah, that one's a little more stubborn. So woody ends are coming off. Get out of here. And this final piece, this one's peeling too. Wow, this is like my lucky day for chopping garlic. That never, ever happens to me. I should buy a lotto ticket. Okay, this last guy though, I'm going to just put my flat end of my knife on it and give it a squash. And that will help the peel to loosen from the rest of the garlic. There we go. So to get these guys minced up, just getting a couple of these little garlic skins out of the way, we don't want that in our soup. I am going to just slice along the length of the garlic. And I'm going to go ahead and just do all 3 cloves at once so that we can get them chopped up very quickly. And this second clove of garlic. Once you get near the end of the garlic, by the way, I'll try to move this so you can see. Turn it so that it's on its flat end. And then you can usually get a few more little sticks out of your garlic. Just a good way to keep it from wobbling and nicking a finger. Same thing here. And again, now that I'm to that flat end, I'm going to lie it down and give it a few more little sticks. Okay, so now that we've got our garlic one direction, I'm going to then run my knife through along the width of the garlic, and that's going to get us some really nice cubes of garlic. And I want this, like I mentioned, to really be in the background of the soup. So after I have gone through and made my little minced garlic cubes, I'm actually just going to rake everything together one more time and run my knife through just an extra time for good luck and to make sure it's really, really minced up, because like I have mentioned, this is all about onions in the onion soup. We don't want a lot of garlic, so the last thing you want is to take a spoonful of soup and bite down on a piece of garlic, even though that really is delicious. It's not what we're looking for in this soup. So that is a good, nice, fine mince. And this way, as they are cooking, they're really going to just melt down and become just a lovely background vocalist for this song. I'm going to get that into my garlic bowl very carefully. It's so fine, it's hard to get it back in the bowl again. There we go. And the next thing, we're going to be chopping up our onions. So for this recipe, you start with so much onion. What we're looking for is about 10 to 12 cups of very finely sliced onions. So you'd be looking at probably about 8 to 10 of the very largest onions that you can find in your grocery store. I like to just use yellow cooking onions. They are the cheapest onions in the grocery store, but also they work very well for this because they just caramelize really nicely, and that's what we're going to be looking for. So I would say, honestly, save your money, get the cheap onions, especially because we're using so many of them. Don't worry about it. So the other note is, I can cut, oh, the toast is ready. I can cut 1 onion, no problem. 2 onions, I start to sniffle a little bit, but by the time we're talking 6, 8, 10 onions, I cry like a baby. So I've actually already done most of the prep work ahead of time. I'm just going to set those, out of the way until we're ready for it. Just want to let you know, you're not going to watch me slice that many onions because I would be standing here for quite some time. So be prepared. This is a labor of love. If you have a food processor, now is the time to get that out because it will chop minutes off of your prep time. So this 1 onion, I will show you how I like to do it. I'm going to start, ooh, he's a tough one, by just slicing off the top. Get that out of the way. And I'm going to slice, I always try to turn it so that I can really see like where the center is through the root. I'm going to slice right through the root so that we cut it in half. And I've said this before, and I cannot repeat it enough. Make sure there is no papery skin on your onion. So always err on pulling off an extra layer if you have to, but especially for this recipe because we're going to be caramelizing the onions. So they're going to be so soft, they're almost like jam. And if you have any paper skin left in that, it stands out and it's a really, really unpleasant experience. I know this because I've done it myself a few times. So really be careful. This is the time to take that time and make sure that you do this very well. So skins are coming off, and see, it looked like from one angle that I was peeling off all of the skin. There's a little bit of extra secret skin there hanging out. So he's coming off too. And now that's gone. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So do that over my garbage bowl. That one looks okay, but I'm just going to give it an inspection, and you can always just kind of try to loosen a layer on either side. And if it starts to get really thin, get rid of it. But if it's thick both ways through like this one is, we know that's okay to go. So for this, we're not going to be slicing it into little pieces. We're actually going to do very thin ribbons of onion. Ah, there is a piece of onion skin. Watch out for that, I warned you. They really want to come play in this party, so just make sure you keep an eye out for them and do not let them anywhere near your soup. It will ruin the entire thing. Okay, so I'm going to, as finely as I possibly can, almost the width of my knife, I'm going to slice these onions. And the reason I want to do it really fine is frankly because it helps it to cook faster. And caramelizing onions is the single hardest part of this soup. And it's not necessarily difficult, it's just very, very time consuming. So the thinner you slice your onions, the faster they will cook. But I use that term fast very loosely because that process honestly is going to take about an hour, and I'll show you how to do that next. So onion sliced. And by the way, I have tried to speed this up, and usually it results in a burnt batch of onion soup and I have to start all over again. So trust me when I say it, low and slow, it's a lazy day off kind of dinner. It's worth the time. And there's just no way to rush it, and I wish there was, but you know what? You can't rush quality sometimes, right? So get that last guy sliced up. Get rid of the roots. That's where most of your tears are anyway, and by the time you're up to onion 8 or 10, you're gonna be glad to have any part of oniony vapor not part of your kitchen. Okay, so these last guys are just going to dangerously pile on top. I'll pull it here so you can see just how many onions we're going to be working with here. It's a lot of onions. Okay, can I balance them all? Yes, I can. Okay, so we've got our garlic chopped, we've got our onions sliced, we have got our bread nicely toasted. I'm actually going to show you because I buttered it ahead of time. Just how pretty that is. Isn't that nice? So these are just going to sit off to the side now. We won't need them again for quite some time. Doesn't matter if they're cold, they're still going to serve their purpose. I'm going to show you how we get caramelizing these onions. Okay, so we've got all of our prep work done. This next part is really the main event of making onion soup. It's not hard, I've said that before, but what we're going to do next is caramelizing onions, and that part takes about an hour. So like I said, comfy day, at home day, you can't rush this, but it is so worth it. So what we're going to start with is actually going to be about a tablespoon of oil. I'm using olive oil, but you can absolutely use whatever you've got in your kitchen, that's fine. And to that oil, we're then going to add another tablespoon of butter. I like to do a mix of both because if we just used oil, there wouldn't be a lot of flavor. If we just used butter, there's the chance that the sugars in the butter are going to burn. But when you do half and half, you get the higher smoke point of the oil with the delicious flavor of the butter, and it's kind of the best of both worlds. So I'm going to move this around in my pan just to get the butter melted. Give that a little bit, and then we're going to be ready to go in with the onions. So what looks right now like an obscene amount of onions, and like I've said, this is about 10 to 12 cups of finely chopped onions, is going to cook down to about that much. It's kind of insane what happens because you cannot fathom that this much onion becomes so little by the end, but trust me, more is better. So to this, before the butter has a chance to cook too much, I am going to then go in. You know what, this is a lot of onions. I'm gonna do it in a few handfuls just to avoid giving myself an oil facial because that would not be good. Once I've got this bottom safely covered, now I can go in with the rest of the bowl, and I have to do it toward me. It's the only way to keep from spilling them. There we go. Okay. It's a lot of onions to try to manage. So we're going to start with basically my full soup pot of onions. It's kind of comedic. I'm sorry. I'm probably smirking a little bit right now, but it is crazy to me no matter how many times I make this soup, how much onion I start with, and by the time you're done, you're like, that's it? Really? It's insane. So get that bowl out of the way. I'm going to just get these onions off of my fingers. And I'm just going to give everything as best stir as I can, given how many onions are in this pot. So I just want to make sure that they have a chance to even kind of get coated in some of this oil, but I don't want to completely pick up the oil that's on the bottom of the pan because we don't want these onions to stick. So this first part I did over about medium heat, but now that they're in there, I'm turning this heat down to low. And it's going to take a while. Like I said, it's about an hour-long process to caramelize onions. You can't rush this part. I have tried. I have ruined so many batches of onion soup because instead of caramelizing, the onions burn. And what's happening when onions are caramelizing is even though if you eat a raw onion, it's very sharp and pungent, they actually have a ton of natural sugars in them. So as you cook them low and slow, you're actually making caramel the same way you would if you were cooking sugar. So it's a slow process. You can't rush it, otherwise you burn the sugar. So take your time. It'll be a while. But to this, we are going to add a teaspoon of salt. And I'm actually going to measure for probably one of the first times in my life. I like to just freestyle it when I cook. And I'm also going to do a teaspoon of sugar, which seems a little weird for a savory soup, but because we're making a caramel, this actually helps the caramelization process of the onions to happen a little bit faster. So we're using it more as a seasoning and not as a flavoring. You won't even know it's there in the finished soup, but man, it is about the only shortcut I have found to caramelizing onions, and it is totally, totally worth it. I'm just going to get my sugar sealed back up. I'm going to give this one last quick stir to just try to get that salt and sugar. So what the salt is going to do is it's actually going to pull some of the water out of the onions. That's going to help them steam first. Once they're done steaming and have kind of reduced down a little bit, when there's no more water left, that's when the caramelization magic happens. So what's going to happen here is about every 5 minutes, I'm going to walk by and I'm going to stir my onions. And then I'm just going to go back to my business. And you repeat this process for about an hour. For the first little while, you'll come to check on your onions and it will look like nothing has happened. And you will be so tempted to crank the heat up, but like I've said, don't do it. Just wait. There will come a moment where you will come back in 5 minutes and lo and behold, you'll start to see golden brown. And then you'll see more brown. And then it will eventually cook down into what I can only describe as jam. If you've never caramelized onions, you kind of feel a little bit like a magician by the end, because you've taken this massive pot of crunchy white onions and turned it into the softest, smoothest, most sweet kind of paste. It's amazing. So these are nicely mixed up now. They're over a good low heat. I am going to pop my lid on, and every 5 minutes, I'm just going to set a kitchen timer over and over and over again. I will come back, I will give them a stir, I will cover them back up, and just repeat this process. The onions will tell you when they are ready. And when they're ready, we're ready for the next part. All right, let's take a look. Those are looking gorgeous. So what 1 hour ago was an almost overflowing pot of onions is now this beautiful caramel colored, sweet smelling onion mixture. It's a labor of love, but boy, is it worth every minute. And I will tell you, the lid off, lid on method that I discovered a few years back is not only the most surefire way to caramelize onions, but it's about the only method I have found that allows you to actually walk away from it for a while. Most other caramelizing methods have you standing here stirring your onions for a straight hour, and I don't have time for that. Sure, you don't either. Okay, so now that these are looking good, I'm going to just kind of push them to one side of the pot. And we're going to go in with 3 cloves of chopped garlic that we chopped up earlier. And I'm just going to get those sauteing a little bit. So the heat is pretty low right now. I'm just going to get it a little higher. And you know what? I'm going to pour a little more oil on top just so we can get them cooking a little faster, because we have spent plenty of time on this soup. We're not waiting much longer for dinner. There we go. I can already hear it starting to sizzle a little bit. So I'm just going to get this garlic mixed around a little bit. I just want to get it softened. It will continue to cook as the soup comes up to a simmer, but I don't want it to have any raw garlic taste to it. I just want to make sure it's not quite as caramelized as the onions, but it's at least a little softer and a little more fragrant than when you just dump it in and it's that harsh raw garlic smell, which can be a really good thing. But again, in this soup, it's all about the onions being the star of the show, and that's what we want here. So while we wait for these to come up to temperature, your hands probably reek of garlic and onions right about now. So a tip is if you actually scrub your hands with some baking soda, it'll help to kind of remove that garlicky onion smell from your fingers. You might have to do it a few times, but it is one of the best household tips I have discovered, and one of the only things that at least takes the edge off. Your hands still won't quite smell like spring roses, but it'll be a little better. All right, I can hear these starting to sizzle now. I'm just going to start mixing them into this onion mix. Another note too, while I was caramelizing the onions, you may have noticed as we were doing the fast forwarding of the onions, there was a period about halfway through where I actually took the lid off for a few cycles, and that was because the onions had really started to absorb a lot, or release a lot of moisture, and they were almost kind of stewing in their own juices, which is not a good way to caramelize onions. So I left the lid off for a little while just to kind of allow a lot of that moisture to evaporate, and once that happened, that's when the caramelization process really started to take hold. After that, I started putting the lid back on because that allows the onions to caramelize without burning, and that allows you to walk away and do something else for a few minutes. Okay, this is looking and smelling like heaven, so we are ready for our next step. So again, I'm going to just make a little well in the middle here. Actually, I don't want to do it over the direct heat. I'm going to do it kind of off to the side, just a bit. Let those onions keep caramelizing for just a few more minutes. I'm going to just take a little bit of oil again and just put it right down in that area. I don't need a lot, but the next thing that's going in is just 2 tablespoons of regular all-purpose flour. And what this is going to do is we're going to make a roux, which is very common for thickening a lot of soups and stews, but we're not going to be making it as thick as like a gravy would be. It's just going to help to thicken the soup a little bit, because what we don't want is just onions and broth, because that's kind of a boring soup. This gives it a little bit more body and a little bit more texture, and is one of the things that just makes it into such a nice, thick, hearty soup. So I'm going to just mix that flour around a little bit in that little bit of oil, just to kind of get it started as a roux, and then I'm going to just start mixing it into the onions. So if you remember, we cooked these onions in a lot of oil and a lot of butter. We put a little bit more oil for the garlic. So there is a lot of oil happening in here, and the flour will start to absorb that oil. So Don't worry too much if it feels like you're putting it into a dry pot. It is going to make a bit of a paste and a little bit of a roux. It's just really incorporating with the onions and the garlic right now, which is good because that's going to make sure it doesn't clump up when we go to pour in the liquid. So I do want to just give it a mix for another minute or so. We just don't want that raw flavor taste in your soup because, again, onions are the star of this show. Raw flour is not. It will add a nice nutty flavor to it if you give that flour just about a minute to cook through. Oh man, this is the hardest part of making French onion soup, is this stage when it just smells like heaven. It's so tempting to just take a spoonful of this onion mixture and eat it like that. Which, by the way, if you ever do make this, set aside a little bit. It freezes really well and is delicious on top of a hamburger. A little less work for you the day that you're grilling. Okay, so you may see that there is a lot of stuff starting to stick to the bottom of this pot. That's not a bad thing. That's actually a lot of extra flavor that goes into the soup. But you do have to be careful at this stage because you don't want it to burn. We've done a lot of hard work here. Don't lose it all at the very end. But it does start to look really nice and golden brown, and that is a good sign that the flour has toasted. So what's going to happen next is I'm going in with 2 liters of beef stock. So beef stock, very, very traditional for this soup. If you're a vegetarian, of course you can use vegetable stock. But if you are a meat eater, I highly encourage you to very specifically seek out beef stock for this recipe. It adds just such a beautiful, hearty, nice body of flavor to it. And anything else I have ever tried, it's just not quite as good. You gotta have the beef stock. So I am going to go in with my first batch. I have warmed this up a little bit. You always wanna put some warm liquid on top of your flour, and that will just keep the flour from seizing up. I'm going to put just a little for a second to just kind of help deglaze the bottom of this pan and pick up all those flour bits, because again, we do not want anything to burn at this very last stage here. And there is a lot of stuff with a lot of sugar in it that is just dying to go from caramel to burnt. Onions have a lot of sugar, the garlic has a lot of sugar. The flour doesn't have so much sugar, but it is very sticky, so all of these things combined will really do their best to stick to the bottom of your pot at this stage. So just take a little extra second, a little extra care. And once you've got that scraped off the bottom, now we can go in with the rest of the stock. Doing that little bit first, I find, also helps to prevent the flour from clumping up on you. So it's just always worth that little splash to get everything familiar with what's happening. And then you go in. Okay, so that is the first liter of beef stock. This is the 2nd liter of beef stock, and this makes a lot of onion soup. So this is a great one to do. Like I said, it's a lazy day. It's definitely a day off kind of food, but if you make a big enough pot, you can keep it in your fridge and have this beautiful, delicious onion soup for dinner for days. Take it to work, make everybody jealous. It's a good soup for that. Okay, so I am going to crank up the heat because I do want to get this to a boil. I'm going to get these out of the way. And to this stock now, we're just about done with the soup. I am going to add an herb blend. It's a French herb blend called Herbe de Provence. You may or may not be able to find it. It has just beautiful French herbs like lavender, thyme. I think there's usually some tarragon in there. If you can't find it though, plain thyme is the next best substitute. This is a tablespoon of Herbe de Provence, and it is all going in. This is going to give it that beautiful, nice French flavor. It's a really cute herb too. A lot of times when I buy it, it comes in this like little tiny burlap sack, and it's I always want to keep the sack. I don't know what I'm going to do with it when I'm done, but it's just one of those things. It's so cute. I never want to get rid of them. So it's part of the fun of buying that herb. So keep an eye out. Oftentimes I can find it at farmers markets, and once in a while I get lucky and I can score it in the grocery store. But again, if you can't find it, plain old thyme, totally fine. And I'm going to give that a good mix. Now it smells like flowers and onions. It's good stuff. Okay, so to this now, I am adding my secret ingredient. I have looked and looked, and no recipe I have ever found has suggested this. Don't tell anybody. It's Worcestershire sauce. And what it does is it gives this soup a whole extra mysterious layer of flavor that's just a savory, as the Japanese would say, umami. It's a really good, intense, savory flavor. I don't even think we have a word for it in English, what they're trying to describe with that, but umami is the flavor. They even say it's an extra flavor that our taste buds can detect. So This is a tablespoon going in. If you can't find Worcestershire sauce, it's okay. You don't have to have it. Like I said, this is my little secret. It will still be a delicious pot of soup. But oh man, I came up with it one day. I was making some soup. I think it was when I was using chicken stock actually instead of beef stock, and I was like, something is missing. Worcestershire ended up elevating it to a whole new level. Then I tried it with beef stock, and oh my gosh, that was the best pot of onion soup I ever made. And now every pot of onion soup is the best pot I've ever made. So I give this gift to you. Next thing I'm going to do is give about a teaspoon of pepper to this pot. This is really going to be down to your tastes and whether you like a peppery soup, a very mild sweet soup. But before I go in with salt, my stock had a little bit of salt in it. My Worcestershire sauce has some salt in it, so I am going to taste it and decide for myself whether I want a lot of salt, a little salt, maybe even no salt. So that's looking good. It smells so good. Let's see what we've got here. Just the tiniest little bit of salt, I think, is all it needs. Maybe one more of those. I have found my pinches are usually about 1/8 of a teaspoon, so I got curious and measured one day. So that's probably about 1/4 of a teaspoon I added to mine, but you may need to adjust depending on the brand of stock you use, how much salt it already contained ahead of time. Every pot of soup is a little bit different. Taste as you go. You won't go wrong that way. I'm going to just give it, oop, that's a dirty spoon. One more taste. Oh, that's so good. I can't wait to eat that. Okay, so I'm just going to give this about 5 minutes to simmer just to make sure that those herbe de Provence can really break down and get kind of soft. It's still a little bit woody right now. But once it's done simmering, we're going to be ready to put it into bowls, and I will show you how to turn it into that beautiful bistro soup with the nice melty cheese on top. All right, soup's on. Let's get it dished up. This stuff is looking so good. It's just like Paris in your kitchen. All right, so I'm going to get this soup ladled into these bowls. So I'm using oven-proof bowls for this because I'm going to be putting them under the broiler to melt some cheese. Oh, I spilled. It's bound to happen when you're scooping soup. If you do not have oven-proof bowls though, I will show you an alternate method to getting this cheese melted. And also, you can eat your soup just like this. So it's delicious. I've done it many times, but if you really want to take it to that next level, bistro style French onion soup, I'm going to show you how we do that as soon as I've got a good couple of ladlefuls of soup in here. And for this, make sure you leave some space in your bowls because you want to leave room for the bread and the cheese that's going to be going in there next. Make sure those are even so nobody fights. Okay, so to these, we are now going to take that toast that we made way back when, try to get even toast here, and they're just going to float right on top of the soup like little rafts. And what these little rafts are going to do is they are going to hold up mountains of cheese. So traditionally you use Gruyere in a French onion soup, and Gruyere is kind of the French version of a Swiss cheese, very similar flavor profiles. I'm not a big fan of Gruyere. I actually like to use sharp cheddar because it's still got a really nice, strong, pronounced, distinct flavor. It's got a nice melting point, so you get that nice stretchy cheese. But you feel free to experiment with different cheeses and use what you want. The only things I would recommend is try to find a cheese that has a very strong flavor and a cheese that melts nicely. But from there, I've done things like provolone, Monterey Jack, all really nice cheeses. Mozzarella is really nice and stretchy, but it doesn't have a lot of flavor, so I don't recommend that one for this soup. But if it's all you've got, by all means, any cheese is better than no cheese at all, in my opinion. And I'm just going to pile this cheese right on top of the bread. And now the bread is actually going to do two things. It'll absorb some of that soup, which is going to make a really nice layer. And then it's also going to keep the cheese from sinking to the bottom. So you get a really, really nice crust of cheese at the top. And that's what makes French onion soup just the most spectacular, out of this world comfort food kind of soup. I wasn't gonna use all the cheese, but who am I kidding? We're putting all the cheese on. There we go. That looks good. Try to get it nicely evenly coated. There we go. Spread some of those out. Oh no, I'm losing cheese. Don't lose the cheese. So important. Okay, and then I'm just going to get my hands dusted off because I've got cheesy hands. And the next step is going to be, so like I said, I have oven-proof bowls, so I'm going to be putting these in the broiler for about 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Keep a really close eye on it. If, however, you don't have oven-proof bowls, you can just put some lids on top of these at this point. The soup is plenty hot and that will be enough to help melt the cheese. But when you put it under the broiler, it gets kind of golden brown and bubbly too, and it's a whole new thing. So if you can, do, but if you can't, don't worry, you can still make a really delicious bowl of soup. So I'm just going to get these guys very carefully into my little oven here. There we go. And I'm going to just get this on, broil, keep an eye on it. 3 to 5 minutes is all you need. Do not walk away. Don't let that cheese burn. And when it's nice and golden brown and bubbly, we'll be ready to eat. Okay, so a few minutes under the broiler has transformed this bowl of soup. Let's take a look. Oh, it looks so good. I'm going to see if I can very carefully get the first bowl out here. They're very hot, watch out. There we go. Look at that. The cheese has gotten so nice and golden brown and bubbly. That is not your everyday bowl of soup. Number 2, let's crack it open and take a look. So at this point, those little breads that we had toasted way back before, they kind of turned into giant croutons, and now that they've been sitting on top of the soup but under the cheese, they've gotten really nice and soft and spongy. Yeah, that's cool enough to touch. The cheese has gotten nice and brown, and underneath it is just this, the soup has thickened because of the bread and the flour that we put in earlier. Oh, look at that. That looks so good. Cheese is kind of nice and stretchy and melty. That is going to be an amazing, amazing dinner and a bowl of soup that you will not soon forget. And here we have a beautiful, hot, bubbly, bistro-style French onion soup, comfort food at its finest. This recipe can be found in the description below. Please like and subscribe for more videos. I'm Jessica. Thanks for watching.